If you're afraid to speak, you're not in a relationship. You're in a contract. This isn't just another relationship advice cliché. This is a fundamental truth about human connection that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. We've been sold a beautiful lie about love, wrapped in romantic movies and fairy tales, that tells us relationships are about harmony, agreement, and keeping the peace. But what if I told you that this very belief is what's killing your capacity for genuine intimacy? Look around you. How many couples do you know who seem happy on the surface, but speak to each other like business partners negotiating terms? How many relationships have you witnessed where both people have become expert performers, delivering lines they think the other wants to hear? How many times have you bitten your tongue, swallowed your truth, and told yourself it was for the sake of keeping the relationship healthy? We live in a culture that has confused love with comfort, intimacy with agreement, and connection with the absence of conflict. We've been taught that a good relationship is one where no one gets upset, where everyone stays calm, where peace is preserved at all costs. But this isn't love. This is emotional anesthesia. This is the slow death of everything that makes human connection worth pursuing. The psychologist Carl Jung understood something profound about human nature. We are fundamentally divided beings. We have our conscious self, the person we present to the world, and our shadow self, everything we've learned to hide, suppress, or deny. In most relationships, we're not connecting soul to soul. We're connecting mask to mask. We're two actors on a stage, both afraid that if we break character, the audience will leave. But here's what Jung knew that most people don't. Authentic relationship begins precisely where performance ends. Begins when you stop trying to be the perfect partner and start being a real human being. It begins when you're willing to risk everything you think you've built for the possibility of something true. The moment you find yourself editing your words, measuring your responses, or walking on eggshells around someone you claim to love, you've crossed a line. You've moved from relationship into contract. You've agreed to trade your authentic self for the illusion of security. And that trade, no matter how comfortable it feels in the short term, will slowly suffocate everything that makes love worth having. This is the great deception of our time, that silence equals love, that peace equals connection, that avoiding difficult conversations equals caring. But silence isn't love. It's fear. Peace without truth isn't harmony, it's numbness. And avoiding difficult conversations isn't caring. It's cowardice dressed up as compassion. Real relationships aren't built on compatibility. They're built on the courage to be incompatible and still choose each other. This is what separates love from arrangement, intimacy from transaction, covenant from contract. When Jung wrote about individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, he wasn't talking about some abstract psychological concept. He was talking about the most practical thing in the world, your ability to show up as yourself in the presence of another person. But here's the paradox that most people miss. You can only individuate in relationship. You can only discover who you really are when you're brave enough to be seen. Think about the relationships in your life right now. How many of them would survive if you started telling the complete truth? How many would crumble if you stopped performing the role you think you're supposed to play? This isn't a judgment. It's an investigation. Because the relationships that wouldn't survive your honesty aren't relationships at all. They're elaborate coping mechanisms dressed up as love. Consider the difference between a contract and a covenant. A contract is based on terms and conditions. I'll give you this if you give me that. I'll be pleasant if you don't challenge me. I'll stay if you don't change too much. I'll love you as long as you remain lovable. A covenant is based on commitment that transcends circumstances. I choose you, and I choose to keep choosing you, regardless of what we discover about each other along the way. Most of what we call relationships are actually contracts. We're trading performances for security, playing roles for approval, managing each other's emotions for the sake of stability. We've become emotional accountants, carefully tracking deposits and withdrawals, making sure the books balance, ensuring that no one owes anyone too much truth or authenticity. But authentic relationship, covenant relationship, begins when you're willing to say, "I'd rather lose this relationship than lose myself in it." It begins when you realize that the person who would leave you for being honest is not someone you want to be with anyway. It begins when you understand that love isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about being willing to conflict with someone and still choose them on the other side. The fear of speaking your truth isn't really about your partner's reaction. It's about your own capacity to handle being fully seen and potentially rejected. It's about whether you believe you're worth loving exactly as you are, not as who you pretend to be. Here's what most people don't understand. The very things you're afraid to say are often the keys to deeper intimacy. Your fears, your needs, your boundaries, your desires. These aren't obstacles to connection. They're the raw materials of connection, but only if you're brave enough to share them, and only if you're with someone brave enough to receive them. We've been taught that good relationships are peaceful relationships. We've been conditioned to believe that if there's tension, conflict, or discomfort, something is wrong. But what if the opposite is true? What if the relationships that look the most peaceful are actually the most dangerous? Jung called it the participation mystique, the unconscious fusion that happens when people lose themselves in each other. It feels like love, but it's actually the death of love. Because love requires two distinct beings who choose each other freely. When you're afraid to speak your truth, you're not preserving love, you're preventing it. Look at the couples who've been together for decades but seem like strangers. Look at the marriages that function like well-oiled machines but have no spark, no aliveness, no genuine connection. These aren't failed relationships, they're successful contracts. Both parties have honored their terms. They've kept the peace, avoided conflict, and maintained the illusion of harmony. And in the process, they've sacrificed everything that makes relationship meaningful. The tragedy isn't that these relationships end. It's that they never really begin. They remain forever in the shallow waters of politeness and performance, never diving deep enough to discover what lies beneath the surface. They're like two people swimming in parallel lanes, never risking the chaos of actually swimming together. But here's what happens when you consistently choose false peace over authentic expression. You don't just lose your voice, you lose your capacity for genuine intimacy. You don't just avoid conflict, you avoid connection. You don't just keep the relationship stable, you keep it dead. The psychologist John Gottman found that successful couples don't avoid conflict, they learn to fight well. They've discovered that the alternative to occasional storms isn't peace, it's emotional drought. They understand that tension isn't the enemy of love, indifference is. They know that passion and conflict often arrive together, and that trying to have one without risking the other is like trying to have fire without heat. When you're afraid to speak, you're not protecting your relationship from conflict. You're protecting it from life. You're choosing the safety of known misery over the risk of unknown possibility. You're trading the chance for extraordinary connection for the guarantee of ordinary coexistence. Consider this: every time you bite your tongue, every time you swallow your truth, every time you choose peace over authenticity, you're making a deposit in the bank of resentment. And like any bank, it charges compound interest. That small frustration you didn't express today becomes tomorrow's irritation, next week's passive aggression, next month's emotional distance, and next year's inexplicable urge to escape. The most violent thing you can do to a relationship isn't to fight. It's to slowly suffocate it with silence. It's to murder it with kindness, to strangle it with politeness, to bury it alive under layers of unspoken truth. False peace isn't peace at all. It's war waged in silence, with casualties that pile up invisibly until one day you wake up and realize you're living with a stranger who happens to share your address and your last name. So what does it look like to choose relationship over contract? It looks like being willing to disappoint someone rather than betray yourself. It looks like saying the thing that needs to be said, even when your voice shakes. It looks like choosing short-term discomfort for the possibility of long-term authenticity. This isn't about being cruel or inconsiderate. It's not about picking fights or creating drama for its own sake. It's about being honest. It's about recognizing that the kindest thing you can do for someone is to give them the opportunity to love the real you, not the version of you that you think they want. Jung understood that individuation, becoming who you truly are, isn't a solo journey. It happens in relationship, through relationship, because of relationship. But it requires what he called the courage to be. The courage to exist as yourself, even when that self doesn't match what others expect or desire. Think about the people in your life who you feel most free with. They're not the ones who agree with everything you say or never challenge you. They're the ones who've seen you at your worst and still choose to be there. They're the ones who've witnessed your shadows and still believe in your light. They're the ones who've proven that they can handle your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. This is what real relationship looks like. Two people brave enough to be fully seen, strong enough to handle what they see, and committed enough to keep choosing each other through the inevitable messiness of being human. But here's the paradox. The very act of speaking your truth, of refusing to hide behind masks and performances, doesn't just change your relationships, it changes you. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you become more yourself. Every time you risk rejection for the sake of honesty, you build the kind of self-respect that no one can take away from you. The people who are meant to be in your life will not only survive your truth, they'll be grateful for it. They'll recognize it as the gift it is, the chance to love and be loved for who you really are, not who you pretend to be. And the people who can't handle your truth, they were never really in your life anyway. They were in love with your performance, attached to your mask, invested in your role, but not in you. Losing them isn't losing love, it's losing the illusion of love. And that loss, painful as it may be, creates space for something real to enter. The question isn't whether you should risk your relationship by speaking your truth. The question is whether what you're protecting is actually worth protecting. If your relationship can't survive your honesty, then what you have isn't a relationship. It's a mutual agreement to remain strangers. But if you're willing to risk everything false for the possibility of something true, if you're willing to choose authenticity over approval, if you're willing to speak even when your voice shakes, then you might discover that the relationship you thought you were protecting was actually the prison you needed to escape. The path to authentic connection doesn't go around conflict, it goes through it. Not because conflict is the goal, but because truth is. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to love someone enough to disturb their peace with your authenticity. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You matter. And any relationship that requires you to forget this isn't worthy of you. The choice is yours. Contract or covenant, performance or presence, safety or truth. Choose wisely because the quality of your relationships will determine the quality of your life. And you deserve relationships that don't require you to disappear in order to belong. The world doesn't need another actor playing the role of a perfect partner. The world needs you, the real you, with all your imperfections and complications and beautiful, messy humanity. And so does everyone who claims to love you. Stop performing. Start being. Stop managing. Start trusting. Stop hiding. Start living. Your authentic self is not too much, too intense, too complicated, or too difficult. Your authentic self is exactly what's been missing from your relationships. Give yourself and the people you love the gift of meeting you.